This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Josie Tchir. Josie is a homeschool mama, farm wife, rancher, entrepreneur, and business owner. Along with her husband, Jared, she owns and operates Fellowship Farms, a direct-to-consumer meat business in Strathcona County, Alberta. She has a passion for good food and fellowship around the dinner table and strives to bring local families great experiences around their own table. I am so excited for you to meet Josie and hear her wonderful story. Before we get to Josie's interview, I want to do something a little bit different. So many of you know on my website, wildrosefarmer.com, we have the tab for the Rural Woman Podcast. And in that tab, we have folks who nominate themselves as well as others to be on the Rural Woman Podcast. And when I got the submission introducing me to Josie, Josie didn't send it in herself. Her husband, Jared, sent in the nomination form. And I thought I would just take a moment to read this form for you. If you've been a guest on the show, then you know I ask you to submit your bio and all of the things. And I don't know about you, but when I submit my own bio, it's quite modest. And if I'm being honest, Josie's was quite modest. Jared, he gets real big brownie points for this, and you'll see why. So here is his nomination form for Josie. The nominee is my wife, Josie. She's an incredible woman, and together we run our farm business, Fellowship Farms. Josie is the main point of contact for our business, working closely with our customers, other local businesses, and our regulatory bodies. Josie grew up on a small farm in New Brunswick and came to Alberta in 2005, where she pursued a family restaurant business, gaining valuable knowledge of the food industry. In 2010, we were married and moved to a small farm in 2013, where we've had horses, pigs, and a donkey, and soon to have cattle here, though we've owned cattle for a few years. We've been working on transitioning the bulk of my family's cattle farm and taking on about a herd of 90 animals. We have been working with the cattle for many years, and we continue to transition the farm. Josie has been an instrumental part, working with the cattle and learning more every day as we grow our farm and business, Fellowship Farms. She is an amazing woman I'm proud to call my wife, and I think she could bring value and a fun episode to your podcast from the food, farming, and homeschooling perspectives. Well, Jared, she did just that. And I am so excited to introduce you to Josie and her story today. And friends, if you have a woman who you think would be a great guest on the Rural Woman podcast, specifically if she is your wife, your daughter, your sister, your aunt, your cousin. I would love for you to send in a nomination form. So you can find that form as well as all of the other information for the Rural Woman podcast on my website, wildrosefarmer.com. Type that in your search engine or just go to the link in today's show notes. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Josie. Josie, welcome to the Rural Woman podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing so good. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. I feel like I'm talking to an old friend this morning, and I'm so excited to share your story.
I am so excited to be here and to share my story with you and with everybody listening.
So for the folks who are unfamiliar with you, Josie, give us your background. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
My name is Josie Tchir, and I currently live in Strathcona County, Alberta. I was born and raised in New Brunswick, and I moved out here in 2005. I grew up on a farm when I was really young. I was born into as a sixth generation farmer. Then I moved to town and got out of farming as my family. And then when I moved out here to Alberta, I was in the restaurant industry. And then I met my husband, who is a fourth generation cattle farmer. And we soon after got married. We had a family and moved to the country, where we live currently on a smaller farm, and we help run the bigger family farm, which we are looking to transition to becoming a bigger farm for us.
We have so many things to dive into. So tell us more about your family farm back in New Brunswick. 6 generations is a very long time.
Yes. And do you know what's funny is I actually didn't realize that I was a 6th generation farmer until very recently. I was born on the farm I was born on that 6th generation farm. It was a multi-animal farm kind of operation for a few generations. And then my great-grandfather was a dairy farmer. And then my puppy, which is what I call him, but my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, got into raising pigs. And then he is now basically a horse rancher. He has horse stables and just a lot of horses. So that's what he does now. And then my paternal grandfather also had cattle. And I think I go back a few generations on that side as well. And I actually was just discussing with my husband this morning about my family farm that I was born on. And we hope to one day, I want to bring him back there to show him that farm, because I grew up going there. I had friends that lived in that farm or on that farm after we moved away. And so I want to be able to show him and show our kids. We have 2 kids, they're 11 and 12. And I want to show them too what our farm looked like that I am from.
That's amazing. It's always cheesy for me when people are like, farming is in your blood. But that is a lot of generations on both sides that have agriculture surrounding them. And just the diverse operations that you would have on the East Coast. I myself have never been to the East Coast of Canada, and I'm crossing my fingers and toes that I make it there. Agriculture there is just so different than what we are used to in Alberta and really anywhere. It's vast across the country. Growing up on the farm and being a part of the farming operation, did you ever think you were going to be where you are today?
No. So we moved off of our family farm, our smaller family farm, I think when I was 6. So I was quite young. We had cows and pigs and horses at that time. And we moved to town, which is also a very small town. I grew up in a very, very small town. But it was always rural life, even though it was town, if that makes sense. So I grew up around the rural lifestyle my entire life, even though I lived on what is called Main Street. But I was going to my puppy's farm a lot still, like growing up, where he had all of his horses. And I had a lot of friends with horses and other farms. One of my best friends is a big dairy farmer. just outside of the town I grew up in. And so I was always around the farming and rural community, but I didn't really see myself there. I always saw myself as an entrepreneur. I actually started creating business plans when I was in the 5th grade. It was just so exciting to me. I wish I knew the number of business plans I've created in my life, because it's a lot, but it's what brought me joy. It's where my creativity kind of went. So I always knew I wanted to have a business of some sort. I didn't realize it was going to be in agriculture until I moved to Alberta and met my husband, who, like I said, was a 4th-generation cattle farmer. But he had a career, a really great career in oil and gas. And he was in that industry for 17 years before we decided to try farming full time. So it didn't come quickly. We had been married for 12 years before we decided that we wanted to try out farming full time. So that's what we did. And it's been a rewarding experience so far. We've learned a lot. But yeah, going back to the question, I don't think I would have saw myself necessarily in agriculture, but I've always loved agriculture right from the time I was born. So
I love the story about, the business planning as a young person. I have always had the entrepreneurial spirit, but I don't have the business planning skills. I just have the big dreamer skills of like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to figure it out along the way. And then when people ask you to back it up, well, how did you do it? You kind of just like sit there and scratch your head and roll, well, I failed at a lot of things before. But, when you have a plan, maybe you can mitigate some of those fumbles along the way.
Yeah.
Talk to us about making that decision. Like you said, you and your husband, Jared, had been married for 12 years before you decided to make the leap into what is now Fellowship Farms. So how did those discussions go? And take us back to that time where you're jumping off.
So honestly, it kind of all started around COVID when we had more time at home together as a family. We have spent so much time as a family always because we homeschool our kids. And one of the reasons we chose to homeschool was actually because my husband had to go out of town a lot. And so we would travel with him, and so we could all be together. But it was really during COVID when we were all home together that we realized we really liked being home. We liked being on the farm. We really enjoyed that we had this lifestyle and this space that we had here. And at the same time as we had all of these thoughts, I mean, we wrote out things on paper so many times, like, how are we going to make this work? Could we make it work at the scale that we need it to survive as a family? And at the same time, Jared's dad was really starting to want to slow down. So we were looking at the way that his dad did it, which was just your standard cow-calf operation. He calves in the spring, sell them in the fall. And we just felt that wasn't really where we wanted to be. We didn't feel like it would work for what we were hoping for the business. So we presented a plan to Jared's dad. I think it was around the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. And it was about the direct-to-consumer beef business. And so we saw that there was a need for it, and we saw that it was becoming more popular, especially throughout the United States, but also here in Alberta specifically as well. And we realized that a lot of people maybe didn't have the space to house a half or whole cow, that they didn't have the finances to put down on that much beef. So we presented the option of doing a direct-to-consumer beef business to his dad at like a smaller scale, and to be selling it in smaller quantities, like 10 to 30 pounds. And so when we presented it to him, he was a little skeptical. He is an old school farmer who we love so dearly. And he was very adamant that we don't quit the oil and gas industry just yet. And we need to show him, that we're going to be able to make it work. He always believed in us, but he always also challenged us because he wanted to make sure that we knew what we were getting into.
And I think as the younger generation, of farmers, it can be really sometimes frustrating when we are presenting new ideas that there is just, it seems like the continuous pushback. But I think there's something special about the older generation and the challenge that they present. Obviously, they've been doing this, is not their first rodeo. And
Yeah.
I'm sure when they were younger, they had ideas that didn't go with the norm. But I think that challenge piece is so important for us to understand all sides of the coin when it comes to what does this actually look like in our operation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious then, for your father-in-law's operation, standard cow-calf, calving in spring, selling in the fall, did he do grass-fed or was it all conventional?
Actually, he has always done grass fed, which is very interesting because a lot of people just don't choose to do that, especially when they're selling to market. But the reason he did that and why it was an easy transition for us to do that was, I think it was mainly because he had the land to pasture and to make his own hay, and he didn't farm grain. So he wanted to be self-sustainable in his operation. And so that was just the easiest way, I think, that he did it. And at the time when we were like explaining to him that there was a market for grass-fed and finished beef, he's like, "Oh, I know, I've heard those things." But I think it's become more known, I would say, in the last decade that there are people who just choose that. Obviously, there are people who choose grain finished as well. There's people on both ends of the spectrum, but we just saw a need for that in our communities. There wasn't a lot of options for that. So it was just an easy thing for us to kind of take over just because we did have the available land and hay and things like that.
Well, and that might have been a benefit to you and Jared with him already doing something a little bit different than everybody else. So maybe that could be the crack that opened the door to having a much more different operation than maybe some of your neighbors. So take us back to the starting days then. You know, you've decided this, you've made a plan moving forward. How did it go from there?
So at the beginning, we kind of looked at other people's operations within our province and within, North America, really, who were doing direct to consumer. We had originally thought we would actually be shipping across the province, as there are other people who do that. But we also knew we wanted to try to find something a little bit different than other people, just as you do when you start a new business. So at the beginning, I remember we sold our first couple boxes in September of 2022. And at that point, we were heading to Calgary for some deliveries because we had some friends in Calgary that wanted to buy from us. So we were practicing packaging boxes with liners and things like that to see how long our meat would last. And so originally that was actually going to be our plan, that we were going to market to Alberta and we were going to ship our product. But within a couple months, we realized, wow, we have a lot of access to the communities around where we live. We're only 30 minutes east of Edmonton. And so our surrounding communities actually we have a big population. We have access to a lot of people. And because we love our communities, like we really, really do everything we can to be a part of our community, it quickly shifted to being like, okay, how can we get our meat into hands of our neighbors? And the amount of people that we deliver to within a 15-minute radius is actually probably pretty crazy. I actually want to do statistics to see we actually reach a lot of people just within 20 minutes basically of our house. And so it definitely came with challenges. Still, we needed to figure out how long it was going to take to deliver, because I deliver everything personally still. So there are some Mondays are our delivery nights, and there are some Mondays that the whole back of the van is packed and I am taking 4 hours to deliver. I still have people ask me, are you going to continue delivering? Is that something you want to do? Why don't you just hire somebody? But being able to connect with our customers at the doorstep, is so cool. The kids love chatting with me, asking me questions, and all of that. So at the beginning, I don't think we knew that that was going to be the way that our business went specifically, but it was definitely a challenge kind of understanding how we were going to make that model work. And aside from that, honestly, one of our biggest challenges was estimating how much beef we were going to need, because we didn't realize how quickly we would sell, which is a good problem to have. But because we're really just getting into farming, we only had so many steers available. And then we're continually growing our herd as we can. Like every year, we're adding more cows to our herd. And in the meantime, we made a plan with Jared's dad that after we bought our X amount of steers, we were going to, if we needed more after that, we would buy from him at market price, because we wanted it to be fair for the family and to make it, we didn't want him losing money. And Jared has 3 siblings. So we just wanted to be transparent and show them that it was going to work even at market price. Well, when we made that decision, market price was pretty decent for cattle. And then last year, we hit an all-time high for cattle prices. And so we ended up losing a lot of profit because we were still paying him market price. So I think, honestly, the biggest struggle that we've had from the beginning, even up until still, we're still going through beef a lot faster than we had anticipated. So growing our herd fast enough, and then also just keeping up with the demand and the market price of beef, so of cattle.
What a problem to have. You keep selling out your beef, right? As a cattle rancher, as a direct to market consumer. But like you said, there's so many logistics that go into the back end of it. It's not just pulling up to Costco and there being a complete freezer full of meat or a cooler full of meat. I'm curious, with your community and the people surrounding you, you obviously have this loyal customer base now that you have built and grown. Were there any challenges around that piece for you, specifically around the grass-fed, grass-finished part of your product?
Honestly, it has all come very organically, like as in it's really spread through word of mouth. I think people who want grass-fed and finished beef know other people who also want grass-fed and finished beef. So I feel like it kind of grew like through word of mouth. And then we also take every opportunity we can to get into community events, like whether that's farmers markets, specialty events, round tables. Like I had mentioned earlier, I really love to be a part of our community. And I think that all just happened, quite naturally. And we just have really loyal customers, honestly. And so that's also been a bit of a struggle because we have such loyal customers. There's been times, especially throughout the earlier winter, that people want beef and we are sold out. And, the last thing we want is for them to have to find someone else. But of course, we know other people who provide the same product as we do. So we will point them in that direction because they need to eat, they need beef, right? So I think moving forward, we're really interested in looking at more of a subscription model specifically for our diehard customers that are wanting their meat every month, because we want to be able to provide that for them. And as our herd grows and as our supply grows, obviously that will be less of an issue for us, but that's kind of where we're hoping to head to.
I think it's so important to kind of point out this maybe soapbox moment of, you have a product that might be a little bit different than your neighbors, or you have a product that could be the exact same as your neighbors. Like you said, grass-fed, grass-finished. The community aspect of that piece is so important. And when it comes to marketing your product, you might have a neighbor that doesn't do grass-fed, grass-finished or anything, and it's just a different product. It doesn't mean it's better or worse, or yours is better or worse, right? And I find in agriculture, there are some folks who are perhaps in the direct to consumer market that market their product as greater than because of these reasons. And when I see that, it is my immediate red flag. If the only thing you have to say about your product is it's better than somebody else's because of this list of reasons, I don't want your product. You can tell me why it's different and let me make a decision on my own as a consumer if that means it's better. But if that's what your only marketing stand is, like, thank you, next.
Yeah. And honestly, from the beginning, I saw other people who had grass-fed and finished, and that is really what they were pushing. It's better than, it's better than. And then when I got more involved in the community of other producers and got to know other people who farm and other women within the business, I quickly was like, okay, that is not entirely true. You're right. They are different. There are people on both ends of the spectrum that love both ends of the products. And I've actually grown in that way to know, like, even though I've seen it push so much on so many other, social medias and stuff like that, I always want to make sure that I don't come across like we are, better than, because I do think there is a place for all of it. And there's a place for all of us. And we all farm differently. We all ranch differently. But the actual community of it, the love that's poured into those animals, no matter what, is all relatively the same. So I think bringing people together is better than pushing people away.
Absolutely. Hey, small business owners, are you feeling overwhelmed by the countless ways to advertise your brand online? Me too. A powerful tool that you might be overlooking: Pinterest. Did you know that Pinterest is the third largest search engine right behind Google and YouTube? With 500 million people using Pinterest every month, it's a goldmine for small business owners like us. Whether you're looking to drive more traffic to your website, grow your email list, or increase product sales, Pinterest can help you achieve your goals. Shireen from Pinning by Bad Gringa is an experienced Pinterest strategist and an avid woman in agriculture who is passionate about helping small business owners like us unlock the full potential of Pinterest. Pinterest is a visual discovery engine. It's perfect for showcasing your products and driving targeted traffic to your website, and Shireen is here to guide you every step of the way. With Shireen's expertise, you'll learn how to create effective Pinterest strategies tailored to your business needs, from increasing website traffic to growing your email list and boosting sales. Don't miss out on the opportunity to transform your marketing strategy with Pinterest. Visit the link in today's show notes and start leveraging the power of Pinterest to grow your business. Pinning by Bad Gringa, helping women in agriculture and small business owners succeed with Pinterest. I'm curious where you are, obviously, in the province. I am at the south end of the province and you are at the middle to higher end of it. Drought. Is this something that you are concerned for your 2024 season?
Absolutely. Last year, we saw a bit of it. The first, half of the summer was really dry. So our first cut of hay was not great. And then all the prices went up for hay. So we knew that we needed to prepare ourselves. And we have lots of local neighbors and stuff who produce the hay in the same quality that we would want. So we did end up securing extra hay if we needed it, which we did. We did not make enough hay last year to sustain our herd. And so going into this year, that's a big talk around the dinner table with our father-in-law, my father-in-law as well, what that looks like, how much hay we're thinking we're going to need. And then, of course, with the dry, we didn't have snow until really like end of December, maybe. I don't even really remember, but we finally got a dump of snow here, about like 12 inches, I would say, in the last month. And that doesn't equate to a ton of precipitation, but at this point, anything helps. So, a lot of the headlines and people are talking about this upcoming drought. And so what we're doing personally is just trying to prepare ourselves to what that's going to look like for us on our farm, and if there's anything else we can do to help with it. I actually attended a drought conference, like a mini night, I guess, on drought in our neighboring county, who put it on, and so I learned some things from there that I kind of took home and shared with my husband and my father-in-law, because I am not so much on the ground when it comes to the actual farming practices. I mean, I'll run gates and run cattle and do those things, and I'll make hay once in a while, but they know a lot more on that end. And so yes, it's definitely something we are concerned about and we're looking into, and we're just praying for lots of rain in spring.
Yeah. Honestly, that's what we can do. I think it's to be proactive, and drought is not new. I think from the time I've been in farming, we've been in a drought. So it is just the reality that we live with. And even if you have irrigation, if there's no water to pump through those pivots, there's no water. So I'm glad you brought up conferences, because that leads me lovely into the next section of questions here. So Josie and I actually have met face to face, which I don't often get to do that a lot with the incredible women that I speak to, but we got to meet before we sat here today. I had the honor of hosting the FCC Young Farmers Summit this past winter, and I met Josie and Jared at my event in Camrose. So it was super nice to see you. I think we had a lot of great conversations about a lot of different things throughout the summit. But one of the big hot button topics that we always talk about in these young farmers settings is transition planning. And you've shared a little bit about your plan with us, or, the talks of it. Would you mind diving in more about what transition planning looks like for you and your family and the farm?
Sure. So when we started, again, that was only just a couple years ago, when we sat down with my father-in-law and kind of presented our plan to him, it was at that time, honestly, it was very much like, okay, you guys can start your own thing. I'm going to stay here and you're going to basically start from scratch. That's kind of how I took it in the beginning. So in the sense of, I guess, that we had originally planned that we were going to be building from the ground up in regards to our herd, in regards to the facility and all of that. So it's honestly shifted quite a bit over the last year. So going in, we thought, okay, we're buying from our dad. That's what we know. And we have access to his equipment, which is amazing because we all know how much equipment can be. We have access to land, although we are renting it at, again, like market value. And on one hand, I kind of felt like we were going into it almost like first generation farmers, but with the multi-generational knowledge and access, which actually means so much. Like being able to talk to him about things that are going on or ask him questions, like having him there is so important. So I think at the beginning, if you had have asked us maybe a year and a half ago, I think we would have said it feels more like we're doing everything from scratch. As time has gone on, I think his dad has realized that what we are doing is going to work. Again, I kind of mentioned it at the beginning. He was a little skeptical, not skeptical, but just he wanted to make sure that we weren't ruining our lives. Honestly, like even when I was at that summit with you, that conference, we're chatting with other farmers, and I keep seeing it. Whereas like our generation of like our age, our parents are telling us don't farm. Like you should maybe do something else. Like it's a hard life. And on one end, that's great that they're looking out for us. But on the other hand, I think a lot of people are coming around that came out of a multi-generation farm who went into a different career, and they came into it now saying, no, I want that lifestyle. Well, why do you want that lifestyle? So it's things like going over in our brains, like why do we choose to do this? It's not easy. It's a full-time, not just, And so I think Jared's father was pretty concerned about that end of it. And so, but like I said, I think over the last year, his heart has changed towards it. And now there are some different discussions of what transition could look like. We're not taking over the farm by any means, but being able to build our herd a little bit easier and try to find a way and to make a plan, like actually sit down and plan, okay, what does that look like? Can we make it work on a greater scale than just starting from scratch? So
I love hearing from folks who have been to any conference, but Young Farmer Summit specifically, that's my favorite. That's my jam because of the conversations that happen around those tables. Because I know agriculture in itself can be really isolating and lonely. And in the grand scheme of things, there's not a lot of farmers around. And when you can sit in a room and have a conversation with somebody who can understand what you're going through, that can be life-changing for people. So my first point here is if there's a conference in your area, go to it. Make the plan to go to it. Doesn't matter what conference it is, go to the conference. Sit in a room full of people who know what you're going through. I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways that I have had for the number of years that I've done this now is looking at transition planning and succession planning on both sides of the coin. And as a young person who can be real damn stubborn sometimes, it's hard to do that. What I'm getting from what the older generation needs from us is a couple things. They need a plan, and they need that plan to be solid. The next thing they need is purpose for themselves. If they leave the farm, what is their purpose? If they no longer farm or ranch or do whatever it is, what purpose do they serve, right? Many of these people, this is the only life they've ever known. So finding that balance between the purpose for them and the profits and growth for the younger generation, I don't have the answer of how you do that, but I think a big important piece to that is the conversations and the transparency and the willing to be open about having those conversations on both sides of the table.
yeah, absolutely. And I think his dad has been very clear from the beginning. I want to see your plan. I want to see your plan. Just recently, like, let's see your 2, 5, and 10-year plan. What does that look like? And 2 years ago, he was very much like, I will not be leaving this farm until I'm in a pine box. That was not in his plan. And as time has gone on, he realizes that, okay, maybe this is something, maybe he will end up leaving, and maybe we will end up moving to the farm, which honestly hasn't really been in our plan from the get-go because it didn't seem like it was a possibility. But I guess my encouragement to anybody who may be going through something like that is to be very transparent. We have been very transparent from the get-go, and Jared has 3 older siblings. He is the baby of the family. And we were very clear from the beginning, we wanted it to be fair. That's what we kept saying. We wanted it to be fair. We didn't want to seem like we were being favored in any way because we were the ones who chose to farm. And so there's been a lot of that. And there's been a lot of discussion around tables talking about with other people who have done similar things as transitioning and stuff like that and succession planning. And I think it was actually at the Young Farmer Summit that I heard this. I can't remember specifically, but they were talking about how you want to try to remove yourself from thinking that if you not take over the farm, but if you end up farming as a multi-generational farmer, you're not taking over all of these assets to then flip them and make a bunch of money. You are continuing on farming to then hopefully pass it down to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. So it's shifted how I think of it a little bit, just because the word fair is it's tricky because I like to be fair. I'm a rule follower. I'm a people pleaser. I want everybody to be happy. And so I don't want to ruffle feathers. And at the same time, if the farmers want to continue that legacy of farming in their families, then to make it a little bit easier for the next generations would be beneficial because let's face it, land prices, the price of everything these days is astronomical. So it's hard to start from scratch. And I give huge kudos to those who are first generation farmers because it is not easy.
Absolutely. One of the best, I say it, stitch it on a pillow and put it in the entryway. When it comes to transition planning, term that a slogan, a tagline that I learned many years ago from a FCC transition specialist. She's been on the show. Her name's Anessa Good Hazard. She shared that fair is not always equal. And that is something that the people pleaser in me and, the person who wants everybody to have everything, it doesn't work that way. And the thing about farming and the thing about our business is at the end of the day, it's a family business. And when we take the family out of it, it's just business. It's just numbers on paper, but the emotion that goes behind it. And specifically, I'm thinking, I recall when we were in Camrose, a question that I had asked the audience was, how many of you farm with your siblings on your family farm? And, a few hands came up. But then I asked the question, how many of you have off-farm siblings? And all of those hands went up. Comparatively, there's not a lot of siblings that are farming together. They might, farm adjacent. They each have their own business, but it's just, the transparency is so important and the communication is so important. And I think the most important thing to say is it's hard and we get it.
Yes, I agree with that.
So now that you have all of your business plans done, you can tell us what your 2, 5, and 10-year plan are. But, condense it down. What are the future goals that you have and what are you looking forward to?
So one of the biggest parts about why we do what we do is also just creating community and fellowship around our table. We haven't really touched on that yet. But again, something that we do differently than other people is like in our boxes of meat, for instance, we give conversation cards every month that you can just bring out at supper time and pass them around the dinner table to create conversation. We add bucket lists to do with your friends or family. And that's kind of where my heart is the fellowship, what happens around food, what happens around the dinner table. I had mentioned I had owned a restaurant in the past, so food has always been a big part of me and a big part of my family. So I think looking forward, obviously one of the biggest things we're going to be doing is hopefully we will be growing our herd, as that's just a necessity. So we will be working on that over the next few years till we get to, the level that we want to be at, that's sustainable for us and for our business. But like with most agriculture farm businesses, you need more than one stream of income, and it still ties into farming, but we really do have a heart for people and for events and things like that. So we do hope to eventually offer some opportunities to come out to our farm and just be a part of why we do what we do. I love creating mood around a dinner table. I like it to be pretty, exciting, always yummy. And so I think along with growing our herd, I think one of our biggest things is, we're working with our county right now. Actually, we had 2 county members come out yesterday for coffee and a visit. So just discussing what tourism looks like within our county and what that means for the agriculture sector, because I think it's actually growing quite a bit, tourism within agriculture, and rural communities. So I think I would say, in a nutshell, I guess growing our herd, creating opportunities for experiences and community events and that sort of thing. And I think that's, kind of the gist of it. And then possibly making a move to the bigger farm, but that is still undecided.
Those are all amazing goals and good things to work towards. And like you said, building that community piece, you can't put money on that because it is absolutely essential for what it is that we do here in agriculture. So Josie, my last question for you is, what is the most rewarding part about being a woman in agriculture and a rural woman for you?
Honestly, it's such an honor to be able to fall under that umbrella. I think it's so beautiful that we live in a time where we are looked at as it's a beautiful thing to be a homemaker, to be someone at home who prepares food for the farmers out in the field, and all of those things that were so important for all of time. But at the same time, women are also, it's great that we can achieve the things that were also, men dominated for so many years. It's, I think, trending upwards. I saw a stat the other day that women are now being more involved in agriculture than ever before. And so I think it's just so amazing that we get to see that live out and that we get to be a part of that.
Right. And I've said this before many times, and I truly believe women have always been a part of agriculture. We are the backbone in agriculture. It's just taken a long time to be recognized, and even longer to be celebrated. And I'm so happy and honored to be celebrating you and sharing your story, and honored that you're here with me today. So thank you for building that community piece, and thank you for sharing your story with us. It's been a pleasure getting to know you more. For the folks who would like to connect with you and Fellowship Farms after the show, where can they find you online?
Yeah, you can find us at fellowship_farms on Instagram. And I think you can find us there on Facebook as well, fellowship_farms.
Perfect. And I will link all of those and your website in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you.
Wonderful.
Thank you again so much for sharing your story. I truly appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.